Slavery has been one of humanity's darkest chapters, marked by unimaginable cruelty, exploitation, and the denial of fundamental rights. It's difficult to comprehend the suffering endured by millions throughout history. But how did this abhorrent practice begin? The origins of slavery can be traced back to ancient times when human beings were first subjugated and treated as property. And surprisingly, it wasn't Africans who initiated this horrific system, but rather Europeans. Let's delve into the dark past and uncover the truth behind the shocking fact that Europeans were the first to enslave Africans. Before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel. Your support means everything to me. Now let's embark on this eye-opening journey. Ancient Greece and Rome, cradle of Western civilization, played a significant role in shaping our world. But their contributions came at a steep price. The ancient Greeks kept slaves. They believed it was perfectly fine to own another person, treating them like furniture or any other household item. For the Greeks, it was just how things were done. There was no shame in owning slaves. In fact, it was seen as a sign of wealth and power. During the height of the Greek Empire, around 400 BC, it's estimated that for every 100 people, 20 to 30 were enslaved. These individuals were not just used for labor-intensive tasks. They were considered property that could be bought, sold, and inherited. The Greeks believed in a social hierarchy where some were destined to be ruled over by others. This ideology justified their enslavement of fellow human beings. It wasn't about race or skin color. It was all about power and control. If you were captured in war or born into a lower social class, you were at risk of becoming a slave. However, the Greeks weren't alone in their proclivity for slavery. The Romans took it to a whole new level. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did its demand for slaves. They were instrumental in building roads, aqueducts, and public works, as well as serving in the military. During the Republic period, it's estimated that there were over 1 million slaves in Rome alone, with nearly half of the population being enslaved. But where did these slaves come from? The Greeks and Romans didn't shy away from getting their hands dirty. They actively participated in wars and campaigns across the Mediterranean, capturing people and selling them into slavery. One of the most infamous slave trades in ancient Rome was the Transatlantic slave trade. This horrific practice involved transporting slaves across the Atlantic Ocean, primarily to the Americas. The demand for labor on plantations and mines fueled this trade, and Europeans were the driving force behind it. From the 16th to 19th centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the ocean under inhumane conditions. Packed tightly in ships, they endured horrific conditions, disease, and death. Those who survived were sold and separated from their families, enduring a life of hardship and brutality. The Atlantic slave trade had devastating consequences for African societies, causing immense suffering and leaving a lasting impact on the course of history. Now that we've established that both the Greeks and the Romans were heavily involved in the slave trade, let's move on to another shocking truth you might not have known before. The Dutch were also major players in this dark chapter. During the 17th century, they established a powerful trading post empire, which included forts and settlements along the West African coast. These strategic locations served as hubs for the slave trade, facilitating the capture and sale of enslaved Africans to European powers in the Americas. The Dutch West India Company played a significant role in this trade, transporting countless individuals across the Atlantic. Their involvement in the slave trade contributed to the immense suffering and loss of life during this horrific period. Furthermore, the Dutch introduced a new element to the slave trade, accounting for nearly 40% of the total. They developed an accounting method to keep track of their inventory. Yes, they literally saw enslaved Africans as products to be accounted for on paper. This practice involved creating detailed records of the slaves they purchased and sold, including their names, ages, and even physical descriptions. The Dutch assigned monetary values to these human beings, treating them as commodities rather than fellow human beings. It gets worse. The Dutch kept detailed records of births and deaths among the enslaved population, viewing them as investments that needed to be monitored for profitability. This chilling accounting system dehumanized enslaved Africans, reducing them to numbers on a page. It was a systematic approach to the horrors of slavery, stripping individuals of their dignity and perpetuating their suffering. Now let's explore another disturbing aspect of the slave trade. Europeans didn't just buy slaves, they actively participated in capturing them. The process was brutal and horrifying, involving deception, violence, and the destruction of African communities. To satisfy their insatiable demand for labor, Europeans employed a range of tactics to lure Africans into traps. One common method was the use of coastal settlements, which served as bases for raids and kidnappings. From these outposts, European traders and explorers ventured inland, often forming alliances with local rulers or exploiting internal conflicts to their advantage. They would deceive or coerce African leaders into supplying them with captives, promising rewards or threatening consequences. Once captives were secured, they were transported back to the coastal settlements, where they were held until they were shipped across the Atlantic. This system of deception and coercion resulted in the brutal disruption of African societies. Families were torn apart, communities were decimated, and entire regions were left devastated by the relentless demand for slaves. Another tactic employed by Europeans was the establishment of trading posts deep within Africa. These posts were strategically located in areas with high concentrations of people and resources. Through a combination of trading goods and military force, Europeans exerted their dominance, compelling local populations to provide slaves. Once the captive was acquired, they were subjected to unimaginable cruelty and dehumanization. They were shackled, beaten, and forced to endure unspeakable conditions. The psychological and physical trauma inflicted upon them was immense. Many captives perished during the brutal journey to the coast, while others were branded or mutilated as a means of asserting dominance. Europeans didn't limit their slave-catching activities to Africa's interior. They also ventured along the coast, employing ships and armed forces to capture those living there. This maritime approach allowed them to target coastal communities directly, subjecting their inhabitants to the same horrors of kidnapping and imprisonment. The reach of European slave catchers knew no bounds. No African community was safe from their relentless pursuit of human captives. Entire villages could be wiped out in a single raid, with their inhabitants dragged onto ships and transported to unknown fates. The devastation caused by these coastal attacks was immeasurable, leaving behind a legacy of trauma and loss. Europeans went to great lengths to ensure the capture of African slaves, employing deceptive tactics, brute force, and a relentless determination to satisfy their insatiable demand for labor. Their actions not only devastated African communities, but also inflicted immeasurable suffering on the individuals who were captured and sold into a life of servitude. In conclusion, the notion that slavery began in Africa is a misconception perpetuated by those seeking to shift blame. The reality is that Europeans were not only the pioneers of slavery, but also its most enthusiastic and active participants. From the ancient Greeks to the modern Dutch, they established systems, institutions, and markets that fueled the transatlantic slave trade. Europeans led the horrific practice of capturing, enslaving, and transporting Africans across the ocean, causing immeasurable suffering and loss of life. It's crucial to acknowledge this dark chapter in history and understand the role of European powers in perpetuating slavery. By uncovering the truth, we can work towards a more just and equitable future. Remember, knowledge is power, and sharing it is our responsibility. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing to my channel. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and continue to challenge the narratives that shape our understanding of the world.